Good afternoon, Kalispera, and thank you for joining this opening presentation for the 2021 SETE conference. I am Peter Jordan, Head of Insights at TOPOSOPHY, and we are helping our industry partners to think differently and plan differently. After all, that's what we do, because some plan different. I am here to set the scene and help make sense of the major shifts and challenges, as well as some of the opportunities created by nearly 2 years of the COVID pandemic. Throughout our program today, our speakers will be diving deeper into many of these topics, and we hope that you enjoy the program. So let's dive in and start with a look at the big picture and this year's tourism performance. So international arrivals have increased by 58%, and this is over those crucial summer months of 2021. It's generally been a better year in 2021 than 2020, but of course that's not difficult. And you'll remember from early on in the pandemic where we talked about the shape of recovery, whether that shape would be a V shape with a quick, sharp recovery, or whether there would be a longer L-shaped recovery, or indeed a U. We're looking at an L, and I think, as you can see from this diagram, from the projections made by the World Tourism Organization, that we are moving into a U. And it's clear then, we've seen that the Delta variant and of course more recently the Omicron variant have incorporated real risk with a further slow to recovery for the international tourism industry. In this environment, global organizations such as the World Travel and Tourism Council, the European Travel Commission, said that the sector just cannot afford the inconsistent, the ever-changing national responses that we've seen. We know that travelers are finding it a bewildering experience to book and plan travel, and that's still the case almost 2 years after this pandemic started. So a joint EU approach is the only solution really to saving this struggling travel and tourism sector in Europe. So against this backdrop, one of the major solutions to this has been or that governments are calling for, has been an efficient digital solution. This is what the industry has been calling for. Here we can see this is the World Travel and Tourism Council, who came out with a whole series of recommendations, technical recommendations and policy recommendations, to propose an efficient digital solution for health checks among international travelers. Now, generally, this has been working reasonably between, for example, cross-border travel for those who use the European Check app. But of course, travelers from other parts of the world don't always have their apps harmonized. And as we have advanced, and over recent months, we've also seen other spin-off problems emerging as a result of using the apps, such as fraud. And of course, the lack of equal access to digital tools that some people face across Europe. So these are all barriers that governments will have to work quickly to overcome. Staying with the big picture and looking at how this has been evolving at international level, we can see that over these crucial summer months, compared to 2019, international tourism arrivals in Europe were 69% below pre-pandemic levels. So looking at this figure the figures in the center for the world was 20% down over 2020, but 76% down on international tourism arrivals compared to 2019. And we can also see that other parts of the world have suffered even more. If we look at Asia Pacific, where cross-border travel has been very complicated, also cross-border travel within the Americas and within Africa has also been complicated in many places. So while we have seen a gradual restart in Europe, the picture is definitely unequal around the world. Let's narrow in and look at the restart of tourism in Greece, because though some may be surprised by these figures, but actually it has been very encouraging to see that the fall has not been so profound in Greece as it has in other European countries. So we can see then, for example, that in January to August 2021, Greece reported 19.3% fewer overnights from foreign arrivals relative to the same period in 2019. And that actually represents the strongest recovery across European countries. The tourism industry this year is projected at recouping around 55% of its 2019 levels, achieving revenues of 10 billion euros, which represents an important boost for the Greek economy, which is now expected to expand by around 6.9% in 2021. Now, let's look then at, we've looked at the big picture. Let's look now at what travelers are looking for when they travel. And we're also going to stay with a relatively big picture and look at the major sets of data that Skyscanner has produced. Skyscanner produced a very interesting report earlier in this year to show that, and it represents that travelers are looking for actually smaller destinations and smaller cities than was the case prior to the pandemic. Looking at this graph, we can see the relative, we can actually see the comparative scale of searches and how that has changed compared to before the pandemic. So, for example, the blue circles represent the size of searches, and as we go up the scale, we look at the increase in popularity. So, Mykonos, Santorini, and Athens are actually among the destinations that have benefited from this change in search ranking of smaller versus large cities compared to 2019. Whereas some of those big business hubs, for example, London, Tokyo, Los Angeles, as well as we can also see Bangkok, which has been very heavily affected by the slowdown in cross-border travel in Asia, those have seen much bigger declines by comparison. So we can see ultimately that this represents a larger number of people shifting interest towards going to smaller coastal destinations and perhaps staying away from those very large city hubs as well. It also, of course, represents the major challenges that the business travel sector has seen as well. So just as much as consumer interest in travel and where to go is shifting, investment priorities are shifting as well. Many of us will recall that the EU announced a major Green Deal initiative and a major funding package, a stimulus package, during the critical months of the pandemic during 2020. And as time has gone on, different organizations have responded to this. But what is true is that the tourism sector is still trying to put together, or still lacks, a real cohesive response to how the Green Deal investment will work for tourism. So the priorities here do include moving towards a clean circular economy. These have been set out by the European Union, as well as the need to restore biodiversity and cut pollution. The World Travel and Tourism Council, looking at this table here, has set out a whole range of areas that the accommodation sector can work on in order to decarbonize over time as well. So over the next year or so, we expect to see a lot more detail come out here and a lot more work going into explaining how this is going to work so that investment can be targeted in exactly the right way. Staying in the area of sustainable tourism, it's also been very interesting to see that consumers are causing some major shifts. The way that consumers perceive travel, their priorities when they're traveling, have definitely shifted here, because consumers are paying a lot more interest in the way that businesses behave and their reputation over time. So according to this survey by Booking, it was a major survey done across a whole range of markets. It was actually done around 30,000 respondents across 30 countries and territories. 83% of travelers, we can see here, think that sustainable travel is vital, while 61% said that the pandemic has made them want to travel more sustainably in the future. It's important to recognize, though, that we can't rely on consumer shifts and consumer interest alone in order to make the changes that are needed in the travel sector. However, of course, it does help to nudge companies in the right direction. It's also true, as we explained in a major publication this year with the European Travel Commission, it's the Handbook on Encouraging Sustainable Tourism Practices, that also a lot more education is needed among businesses, but also among travelers around what sustainability in travel really means and what type of actions are required. Now, it's also interesting, it's important that we note that essentially when we talk about making travel sustainable, we're essentially talking about doing less harm. But how easy is it on the end for businesses and destinations to move beyond sustainability? In other words, rather than doing less harm, actually performing good and bringing net benefits to destinations. This is more than a trend, actually, and it definitely there are more and more examples that are emerging globally around businesses and destinations that are trying to make this shift. Here we just show one example from the International Visitor and Conservation and Tourism Levy in New Zealand. It's essentially a tourism tax that the New Zealand government brought in just a couple of years ago, but they've been very clear in setting out how they would like to use this money in order to repair, restore, and regenerate destinations. So the initial round of the investments from this tax or the levy were announced in August 2020. That included 10 investments with a total of nearly $40 million across the life of the investments. We expect to see a lot more of this, governments explaining what they are doing with tourism tax money to explain how they are actually helping to actively regenerate destinations. At local level then, it's also true that destination leaders are absolutely expecting to expand more into the function of destination management over marketing. In the 2021 Future Study, Destinations International, which is a professional organization representing destination organizations as well as convention and visitor bureaus worldwide, they asked DMO officials to rank the most important organizational roles and KPIs, both for today and ideally what they expect to see in 3 years' time. From an organizational roles perspective, leaders are absolutely eager to expand more into product areas such as product development, as well as data use and research and business intelligence, as well as improving the visitor experiences and encouraging workforce development. So perhaps the pandemic to this extent has also started to accelerate this shift away from just focusing on promotion towards a whole host of other activities in the destination. Another important trend, and it's also important to recognize with that in mind, that DMOs or organizations representing destinations, in this case, major cities, are being a lot more open and clearer about what makes the right visitor for their destinations. What do we mean by this? Well, typically we've long heard this term, which is quality tourism, and Amsterdam, which has been its pioneering destination in many senses, has set out in its visitor economy strategy, which is available, you can find it online. They set out the type of visitor which they believe brings most value to the city. And this is increasingly being explained not just in monetary terms, but also in terms of their impact, the visitor's impact on the environment and on the local society as well. And also that it's interesting to note that they're interested in visitors that align well with the values of the city as well. So this focus on quality tourism, finally, it looks like we're really getting into explaining what this really means, especially in terms that go beyond money. Now, when we look at another trend, it's perhaps not surprising that that there has been this major shift from international travel to domestic travel. People ultimately have been forced to travel in different ways over the past couple of years. And it will be very interesting to see whether this increase in loyalty towards domestic destinations really holds. We know that international travel is complicated right now, and it will probably remain so for quite some time. So in Europe, we've seen this considerable increase in domestic tourism spending in recent years, just over the period of the pandemic, around 30% increase in domestic tourism spend there. That increase, of course, has been much bigger in parts of the world where travelers haven't really been able to cross borders easily. The borders of China, for example, have remained closed since around February 2020. So the increase has been more profound there, as well as in the Americas, where cross-border travel has been very complicated and governments have kept borders closed. So essentially, we could turn this on its head and also look at this opportunity that comes from this, and we're calling it backyard adventures, where people are making much more out of leisure experiences and they're being forced to discover what is to be found in their own backyard. One of those activities has been wellness, and perhaps it's understandable when people have been confined for so long in their houses, they haven't been moving much. People are keen to try and offset some of these major changes to their personal and professional lives, because ultimately a lot of people have felt under pressure that they want to engage much more in different types of wellness, improving their physical health, their fitness, as well as increasingly looking after their mental health. And the theme of mental health has been an incredibly important issue, which hasn't really been talked about as much as it should be. And it's interesting that in terms of travel, We previously expected for people just to come and relax, but perhaps it's important that we're moving beyond this now and looking at the different ways in which people want to actually feel better as a result of having traveled. According to this research by American Express, the consumer's desire and appreciation for travel is strong. So 81% of consumers said that their freedom to travel was now more important than before the pandemic, that this is something they wanted. They also said that 88% agreed that travel helps them to improve their mental health, and 62% of consumers want to go on vacation to relax and unwind, while 55% said that they would actually be willing to pay extra for wellness activities on future vacations. So it's really important that we consider how we act on this and how we help to play an active role in supporting wellness among visitors. And we understand that we can actually play this active role, and it's not necessarily perhaps the passive role that the tourism industry has played over the years. It's also perhaps understandable that people are really looking for flexibility, and that the use of technology here is a major ingredient in building confidence. Confidence to book, knowing that you might be able, hopefully you may get a refund if things don't go well, or that you can quickly change your plans, as well as decreasing interaction with service staff. This is something that, of course, a lot of businesses have looked for as well, often to try and cut costs, but also improve staff safety related to the virus. So it's true that this pandemic situation has really increased very fast the digitalization process in the travel industry, and we're essentially still in the middle of this. This is certainly an effect that is going to carry on gathering pace over the years to come. Just for example, in the areas of self-service check-in, contactless mobile payments, using Apple Pay, and having those flexible mobile boarding passes, all of this is, people are much more fluent in using these type of technologies now. But at the same time, it's interesting to note that the use of humans and the help that humans can give in navigating this complex situation is definitely still a valid one. Younger generations of travelers actually are increasingly looking to travel advisors to help plan their next trips. We're talking about customers that may have money to spend, but they don't have a lot of time. We know that people's work and productivity has increased. Often when they're working at home, they're under a lot of pressure, but they still want to get away, and they need someone who can advise them on exactly where to stay in order to make the most of their limited time off. So just this solution from Innova is helping to match people with people in order to plan their journeys better. And this is an increasing. We think that we're likely to see a lot more of this, where the role of the traditional travel agent that you walk into in the high street is obviously on quite a decline now, but this underlines the importance of forming these type of relationships with these key decision makers who are helping travelers to make their travel decisions. A new tribe that we're interested in looking at now is our digital nomads. We know that it's part of many destinations' strategy to have a long stay market, visitors who are going to contribute more to the local economy and society. This is a recent report that we released actually just last week with the European Cities Marketing Organization. It's an association of major and capital cities across Europe, and we thought it would be interesting to look at this market, because not only because this represents a pool of talent who are traveling around the world, but actually because the way that businesses are reacting to this can teach us a lot of very interesting lessons about the way that the hospitality industry is likely to work, blurring those boundaries between work, rest, and play in the coming years. And it's been very positive to note that Greece has reacted to this trend. This is a new initiative from Marketing Greece, which highlights the country's unique qualities as an ideal destination for remote workers, as well as offering, and this is crucial because when people make these large decisions to go and spend a long period of time somewhere, they really need this practical information on how to make the move, as well as how to get a digital nomad visa. So I think obviously we're seeing a huge amount of flux in the workplace, and destinations are increasingly competing for this very interesting tribe of travelers. And we've seen how, for example, co-working spaces and accommodation companies are merging and joining forces in order to attract digital nomads. It's also perhaps unsurprising that the disruptions in supply chains that we've seen around the world have also meant that people are not so interested as much as they were in ordering produce and products from the other side of the world. And it has pushed people to explore what is good locally. So this trend of authentic experiences and localism, we were talking about this before the pandemic, but this is much over the course of the pandemic, it's been much more combined with this knowledge about about appreciating what's local and about ensuring that it's has a much lower environmental and social impact than before. So according to a major TripAdvisor study, more than 3 in 4 consumers globally agree that it's important for them to shop locally and support local businesses and restaurants. So more than ever, we're seeing the convergence of the shop local theme as well as the sustainability theme. Now, we're starting to round up for today, but I thought it would be important to mention business travel, because we know that there's been a huge amount of disruption here. It's in the end the purpose and the distance of business travel, as well as, and this is an important new dimension, the CO2 output that business travel represents. Companies are looking for ways to cut their CO2 output, and increasingly business travel is part of that process. So with a 20% reduction in corporate travel spending is being expected by 2023. And we do expect that recovery will vary depending on the purpose and the distance of business trips. So this sort of hybrid form of interaction is likely to increase. Teams might be brought together in other locations, in places that are easy to get to. And of course, navigating those public health concerns is still a challenge. So overall, we see quite a challenging scenario for business and business travel, perhaps travel in smaller groups and perhaps less of the very, very large conferences. So those are expected to decrease in physical size, but the virtual channels are going to be seen more as a complement rather than a full substitute to large numbers of people coming together. And we're going to close up today with a subject that hasn't received as much attention as it should, but it is starting to become a hot topic because especially in some of Greece's major outbound markets, and perhaps also in Greece itself, it's around visibility and representation of people in travel. What do we mean by this? Well, we mean that tourists, in particular, those from a Black or other ethnic minority backgrounds, are paying very close attention to how destinations and travel service providers approach this subject of diversity and equity in travel. We know that there have been we've seen the last couple of years of major social justice protests, for example, in the Black Lives Matter movement, which has grown and this is something which businesses in all sectors are starting to react to. It does appear that a major shift is underway, particularly among consumer brands and consumer-facing brands. We think of markets such as the UK, France, Germany, the Netherlands. There's a definite understanding that consumers facing brands, those that interact with people every day, for example, whether it's supermarkets or car companies, need to get much better at reflecting who their consumers really are. And that includes then, for example, incorporating much more diversity training and also improving the representation of visibility and minority groups in their advertising. So we like helping people to think and to plan different. And we really hope that this has been part of the process. We really hope that you enjoy the rest of today's program, and we'd like to thank you very much, and we look forward to remaining in contact with you. Thank you very much.